The worst heartbreak isn't when someone steals the person you love. It's when the person who has always been beside you is the one quietly pushing everyone else away. If you had asked me a month ago who was responsible for the disaster that was my dating life, I would have answered without hesitation. Lucas Carter. My roommate. My best friend. The guy who somehow managed to ruin every promising relationship I had without ever admitting he was doing it. At first, it was almost funny. My first date canceled because Lucas called saying our apartment ceiling was leaking. I rushed home to find him calmly eating takeout, while a single drop of water landed in a bucket he had placed under a tiny stain. The second guy stopped texting after Lucas accidentally mentioned that I snored loud enough to scare wildlife, even though I had never snored a day in my life. Then there was the woman from accounting who mysteriously learned I still owned a collection of action figures from middle school. Lucas claimed she had asked what hobbies I had. I claimed he had committed character assassination. Somehow, he always looked completely innocent. I was just being honest, he would say with that maddening half-smile. Honesty builds healthy relationships. I should have recognized the pattern sooner, but friendship has a strange way of making excuses for people you care about. Lucas and I had shared apartment 5B for almost 4 years. We split rent, groceries, streaming subscriptions, and an unhealthy addiction to late-night diner pancakes every Friday. We argued over whose turn it was to do laundry, fought about thermostat settings every winter, and somehow always ended up watching terrible reality shows neither of us admitted to enjoying. Everyone assumed we were a couple. The mail carrier thought so. Our neighbors thought so. Even my mother had asked twice if there was something I wanted to tell her. There wasn't. Lucas dated occasionally. So did I. At least I tried. Yet somehow every relationship of mine crashed before it ever had a chance to become real. By the time my 6th date ended in complete humiliation, I had officially reached my limit. Her name was Claire. We had laughed over tacos, talked about road trips through Colorado, and even planned a second date before my phone buzzed for the 8th time. Lucas. Again. I ignored it. 30 seconds later, another call. Then another. Finally, I answered, convinced the apartment had caught fire. Ethan, he said calmly. Did you leave the freezer open? I stared at the phone. Lucas, seriously? I think the ice cream is melting. Across the table, Claire watched my expression change from concern to disbelief. She smiled politely, grabbed her purse, and quietly said she didn't think I was ready for a relationship. Before I could explain, she walked out into the cool Chicago evening, disappearing into the crowd without looking back once. I stood there holding my phone, listening to Lucas ask whether mint chocolate chip was supposed to be soft. When I got home, he was sitting on our faded blue couch wearing gray sweatpants and one of my college hoodies, watching a baseball game like nothing had happened. How'd it go? He asked. I looked at him for a long moment before dropping my keys onto the kitchen counter. You know what, Lucas? I said quietly. I think you just ruined the last date I'm ever going on. For the first time in years, the smile disappeared from his face. He looked down at the coffee table, his fingers tightening almost invisibly around the television remote, and after a long silence he whispered so softly I almost missed it. Yeah, maybe I did. The apartment felt strangely quiet the next morning, but it was not the peaceful kind of quiet. It was the kind that settled between two people who had spent years finishing each other's sentences and suddenly had nothing to say. Lucas left for work before I even poured my first cup of coffee, leaving behind nothing except an empty mug in the sink and a sticky note on the refrigerator that read, "Do not forget your lunch." His handwriting was as neat as ever. It annoyed me that even after everything, he still remembered I always forgot to pack food on busy Mondays. At the design studio, I tried to lose myself in deadlines, client revisions, and endless emails, but every conversation somehow circled back to relationships. My coworker Melissa leaned against my desk with an amused smile. So, how did date number 6 go? She asked. I let out a tired laugh. It lasted longer than the others. That bad. Lucas called because the freezer was apparently having an emotional crisis. Melissa blinked. You left because of melting ice cream? I thought something serious happened. She folded her arms and stared at me for several seconds before shaking her head. Ethan, I have to ask something, and you cannot get offended. That sounds dangerous already. Are you absolutely sure your roommate is not in love with you? I almost choked on my coffee. Lucas? No. You answered way too fast. Because it is ridiculous. She shrugged. Maybe, but I have known people who did stranger things. I dismissed the idea with a wave of my hand, yet her question stayed with me long after she walked away. During lunch, I found myself scrolling through old pictures on my phone. Road trips to Wisconsin, holiday dinners, baseball games, birthday parties. In nearly every photo from the last 4 years, Lucas was standing somewhere beside me, sometimes smiling, sometimes making a ridiculous face behind my shoulder, sometimes simply looking at the camera while I laughed at something else. I had never noticed how naturally we existed in the same frame. That evening I decided enough was enough. If I wanted a normal dating life, I needed distance. I signed up for another dating app, updated my profile, and promised myself that Lucas would not even know when I met someone next. No more sharing plans. No more mentioning names. No more giving him opportunities to interfere. 2 days later, I matched with someone named Noah Bennett. He taught history at a local high school, loved bookstores, hated pineapple on pizza with surprising passion, and somehow managed to make me laugh through messages alone. We agreed to meet Saturday afternoon at a coffee shop near Millennium Park. This time I told absolutely no one, not even Melissa, especially not Lucas. Saturday arrived bright and cool, with the first hints of autumn drifting through downtown Chicago. I quietly grabbed my jacket, checked that my phone was fully charged, and reached for the apartment door. Heading somewhere? Lucas asked from the kitchen without looking up from the newspaper spread across the counter. My heart skipped. Just out. With anyone? Maybe. He finally raised his eyes to meet mine. His expression remained calm, almost unreadable, but something flickered behind it so quickly I could not name it. Have fun, he said. Just 2 simple words. No fake emergencies. No mysterious phone calls. No awkward interruptions. As I walked toward the elevator, I realized something felt even stranger than his interference. For the very first time since we had become roommates, Lucas was letting me leave without trying to stop me, and somehow that unsettled me far more than if he had ruined another date. Noah was nothing like anyone I had dated before. He arrived 5 minutes early carrying a paperback novel tucked under his arm, apologized because he thought he had kept me waiting, and smiled with the kind of warmth that made every conversation feel effortless. We spent nearly 3 hours wandering through Millennium Park, debating whether deep dish pizza deserved its reputation and laughing over childhood stories that somehow became funnier with every step. There were no interruptions, no mysterious phone calls, no dramatic emergencies waiting back at the apartment. Every few minutes I caught myself checking my phone out of habit, almost expecting Lucas's name to appear across the screen. It never did. By the time Noah walked me to the train station, I realized something surprising. I actually wanted to see him again. Next Saturday? He asked with an easy grin. There is a little bookstore cafe in Lincoln Square that I think you would love. I smiled without hesitation. I would like that. As the train carried me home, I stared at my reflection in the window. For the first time in years, a date had ended exactly the way I always imagined it should. No awkward exits. No apologies. No disappointment. I should have been relieved. Instead, a strange feeling settled quietly in the back of my mind. It felt as though I had left something unfinished behind. When I opened the apartment door, the familiar scent of fresh pasta greeted me. Lucas stood at the stove stirring tomato sauce while soft jazz played through the small speaker on the kitchen counter. He glanced over his shoulder. Hey. That was it. No questions. No teasing smile. No sarcastic comments about my dating choices. He simply turned back to the pan. The silence stretched between us while I hung my jacket by the door. Finally, I cleared my throat. You are not going to ask how it went. He shrugged lightly. If you want to tell me, you will. His answer caught me completely off guard. This was the same man who once asked for a detailed review of an entire dinner conversation because he claimed it helped him understand people better. Now he acted as though none of it mattered. During dinner, we talked about work, rising grocery prices, and whether the Cubs had any chance of making the playoffs. Noah's name never came up. Later that night, as I walked past Lucas's room on my way to bed, I noticed his door was slightly open. He sat at his desk staring out the window instead of working on architectural drawings like he usually did. A cold cup of coffee rested untouched beside him. The blue glow from downtown Chicago reflected across the glass, making his expression impossible to read. For just a second I considered asking if everything was all right, but before I could speak, he quietly closed the door. Over the next 2 weeks the pattern continued. Noah and I met again, then again after that. Each date felt easier than the last. He was thoughtful, funny, and patient. He remembered little details about conversations from days earlier, and somehow always knew exactly which questions made me feel seen. Yet the one person who had spent years interfering had completely disappeared from the story. Lucas stayed late at the office more often. Friday pancake nights quietly ended without discussion. Sometimes I woke up to discover he had already left. Other nights I fell asleep before hearing his key turn in the lock. It was almost as if he were slowly erasing himself from the apartment we had built together. One rainy Thursday evening, Melissa glanced at me across the office and smiled. "So your roommate finally gave up." I looked down at the message Noah had just sent asking if I wanted to spend the weekend visiting an art festival together. I should have answered yes immediately. Instead, I found myself wondering why Lucas had become so quiet. And for reasons I could not explain, that question lingered in my mind much longer than Noah's invitation. The following Tuesday began like any other. I woke to the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the apartment, but when I walked into the kitchen, the coffee maker had already shut itself off. A neatly folded note rested beside my mug. "There is enough for one cup. Have a good day, Lucas." I read the sentence twice before looking around the empty room. His favorite navy jacket was gone from the hook by the door, and so were the running shoes he always left in the hallway no matter how many times I complained about them. Somehow, the apartment looked cleaner than ever, and I hated it. That evening, Noah met me outside the Art Institute of Chicago with 2 admission tickets already waiting in his hand. We wandered through quiet galleries, stopping in front of paintings that seemed to stretch time itself. Noah had an easy way of asking questions that made every answer feel important. He wanted to know why I became an illustrator, which cities I dreamed of visiting, and what home meant to me. I opened my mouth to answer, but the first image that came into my mind was not a place. It was Lucas standing barefoot in our kitchen on Saturday mornings, flipping pancakes while pretending he had invented the recipe. I laughed at myself and quickly changed the subject. After the museum closed, Noah suggested dinner at a small Italian restaurant nearby. The candlelight reflected softly against the windows while people around us celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and ordinary Tuesdays that somehow looked extraordinary. Everything about the evening was comfortable. Everything should have felt right. Halfway through dessert, Noah smiled and leaned back in his chair. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think there is room in your life for someone new?" His voice was gentle, carrying no pressure, only honest curiosity. I looked at him and realized he deserved an honest answer. Before I could speak, my phone buzzed once. A single message. "Lucas." I frowned before opening it. It only contained 3 words. "Take your time." Nothing else. No emergency. No request. No explanation. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. Noah noticed immediately. "Everything okay?" I locked my phone and forced a smile. "Yes, just my roommate." Noah nodded politely, but I could see the question lingering behind his eyes. On the train ride home, I reread the message several times. "Take your time." It sounded almost like permission. Or maybe goodbye. When I reached our apartment building, I noticed something unusual before I even unlocked the door. The nameplate beside apartment 5B had been removed from one side. Only my name remained. Confused, I hurried inside. The living room looked almost identical except for one impossible detail. The bookshelf Lucas had built with his own hands was gone. So was the record player we used every Sunday morning. His favorite reading chair had disappeared from the corner beside the window, leaving a pale square on the hardwood floor where sunlight had never reached. I walked toward his bedroom and slowly pushed the door open. The room echoed with emptiness. The bed was stripped. The closet stood open. Every box was gone. Only a single envelope rested neatly on the windowsill with my name written across the front in Lucas's unmistakable handwriting. My heart began beating so loudly that the silence around me almost disappeared. I picked up the envelope with trembling hands, but before I could open it, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to find Lucas standing in the hallway carrying one last cardboard box. He offered me a tired smile that did not reach his eyes. "I was hoping I would be finished before you got home," he said quietly. Then he took a slow breath, looked around the apartment that had been our home for nearly 4 years, and added the words I never imagined I would hear. "I found another place to live. You do not need me here anymore." For several seconds, neither of us moved. Lucas stood in the hallway holding the last cardboard box as though it weighed far more than it should. I looked from the empty bedroom to the envelope still resting in my hand, searching for words that refused to come. "You are moving out?" I finally asked. He nodded once. "The lease transfer is already approved. The landlord has the paperwork." "Since when?" "A couple of weeks." The answer landed harder than I expected. A couple of weeks. That meant he had made the decision before my last few dates with Noah, before the museum, before every quiet dinner we had shared without really speaking. "Why did you not tell me?" Lucas lowered his eyes with the smallest hint of a smile. "Because I knew you would ask me to stay out of habit." He set the box beside the front door and reached into his pocket, placing a spare apartment key on the kitchen counter. The tiny piece of metal made almost no sound when it touched the surface, yet somehow it echoed through the entire apartment. "You deserve space to build your own life," he said softly. "You finally met someone who makes you happy." I did not want to keep getting in the way. Before I could answer, he picked up the box again. "Take care of yourself, Ethan." Then he walked toward the door. I watched him disappear into the hallway without looking back. A few seconds later, the elevator doors closed somewhere beyond the corner, and the apartment became quieter than I had ever known it could be. The silence followed me through the rest of the evening. I opened the refrigerator and instinctively reached for the orange juice Lucas always bought, only to realize it was gone. I searched for clean towels before remembering he had been the one who always folded them. I stood in the middle of the living room, remote control in hand, staring at the television because I could not remember what I usually watched when nobody argued with my choices. The next morning I woke before sunrise because I thought I heard someone making coffee. It was only the heating system clicking on. Friday arrived, and without thinking I drove to the little diner where we had eaten pancakes almost every week for years. The waitress smiled as I walked inside. "Just one today?" she asked. I hesitated before answering. "Yes, just one." She glanced toward the empty seat across from me, as though expecting someone to arrive late. While I picked at my breakfast, my phone buzzed with a message from Noah asking if I wanted to spend Saturday at the art festival we had talked about. I stared at the screen for almost a full minute before replying that I would love to go. It was exactly the answer I should have wanted to send, yet it felt strangely automatic. Later that afternoon, I returned home carrying groceries and realized there was no one to remind me that I had bought the wrong pasta sauce again. No one humming softly while organizing the pantry. No one leaving sarcastic notes on the refrigerator. I wandered into the spare bedroom that had once belonged to Lucas. The walls looked bare without his sketches pinned above the desk. Dust outlined the places where furniture had stood for years. As I opened the closet to see if he had forgotten anything, a small storage box tucked onto the highest shelf caught my attention. It had been pushed so far into the corner that I almost missed it. Curious, I climbed onto a chair and carefully pulled it down. A thin layer of dust covered the lid, and written across the top in neat black marker were 3 simple words that immediately made my heart race. "For Ethan only." My hands hesitated above the lid for several long seconds before I finally opened the box. Inside there was no money, no legal paperwork, no dramatic farewell. Instead, I found dozens of ordinary things that suddenly did not feel ordinary at all. Ticket stubs from baseball games we had attended together. A faded receipt from the diner where we had shared our first Friday pancakes after becoming roommates. A keychain shaped like a tiny sketchbook that I had once admired in a gift shop before deciding it was too expensive. Lucas had bought it anyway, but somehow had never given it to me. Beneath those little memories rested a thick stack of photographs held together with a simple blue ribbon. I slowly untied it. Every picture included me. Some had clearly been taken with my knowledge during birthdays and vacations, but others captured quiet moments I never remembered posing for. I was laughing while carrying grocery bags through the parking lot. I was asleep on the couch with a half-finished illustration resting on my chest. I was standing by the apartment window watching the first snowfall of winter. None of the photographs felt invasive. They felt cherished, as though someone had been collecting tiny moments because they were afraid those moments would disappear forever. My heart beat faster as I reached the bottom of the stack. There I found a small notebook with worn leather corners. The first page was dated almost 4 years earlier, only a few weeks after Lucas had moved into apartment 5B. I expected project notes or random sketches. Instead, the first sentence stopped me completely. "Today, Ethan laughed at one of my terrible jokes." I think that sound might become my favorite part of every morning. I turned another page. He skipped breakfast again, so I left him a sandwich in the refrigerator. He never notices who keeps replacing the orange juice. Another page. Ethan smiled at someone on the train today. I caught myself wondering whether one day someone else will get to see that smile every morning instead of me. The entries were never dramatic. They were quiet observations, little moments stitched together over years. Every birthday was recorded. Every promotion at my job. Every disappointment after another failed relationship. One page had only a single sentence written across the center. He pretended he was fine after that breakup. He was not. I stayed up watching movies with him until 2 in the morning because I did not know how else to help. My vision blurred as I continued reading. Tucked between 2 pages was an unopened envelope addressed in Lucas's handwriting. The date in the corner was nearly 2 years old. I carefully unfolded the letter inside. Ethan, I have rewritten this 100 times because every version sounds selfish. I love you more than I know how to explain. I have tried convincing myself it will fade, but it only grows stronger every time we cook dinner together, argue over laundry, or laugh at something nobody else would understand. You deserve someone brave enough to tell you the truth. I am still trying to become that person. The letter ended there. It had never been signed. It had never been given to me. Beneath it rested a small velvet box. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing a simple silver ring resting on dark fabric beside a tiny folded note. It read, "Not yet. Only when he smiles because of me, not because he feels sorry for me." I sat alone in the empty apartment, surrounded by years of silent love that had existed only a few feet away from me every single day. And for the first time I understood that Lucas had never been trying to hold on to my future. He had been quietly carrying the weight of feelings he believed he had no right to ask me to return. I did not sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, another page from Lucas's notebook replayed in my mind. The little moments I had forgotten had become milestones in someone else's heart. By sunrise, I realized there was only one person who might be able to explain everything I had failed to see. Around noon, I drove across the city to the architectural firm where Lucas worked. His assistant looked surprised when I asked for him. "Lucas took the week off," she said gently. "But if you were looking for him, you might want to talk to Daniel. They have been friends since college." 10 minutes later, I found myself sitting across from Daniel in a quiet coffee shop a few blocks away. He studied my face for a moment before sighing with the expression of someone who had expected this conversation years ago. "So," he said, stirring his coffee, "you finally found out." I looked down at the notebook resting inside my backpack. "How long has he loved me?" Daniel smiled sadly. "Long enough that I cannot remember a version of Lucas who did not." The words settled over the table like a heavy winter snowfall. "Then why did he never tell me?" Daniel leaned back in his chair. "Because every time he almost did, you were excited about someone else. You would come home talking about a new date, a new possibility, a new beginning. Lucas would smile, encourage you, then spend the rest of the night pretending he was too busy to watch television with me because he did not want anyone to notice he was falling apart." I struggled to match that image with the calm, dependable roommate I thought I knew. Daniel continued quietly. "You always believed he ruined your relationships because he wanted to control your life. That was never true. Then why?" He looked out the window before answering. "Sometimes he really believed the people you met were not right for you. He noticed things others missed. One person lied about having a job. Another flirted openly with someone else while waiting for you to arrive. Lucas protected you more than once without taking credit for it." I remembered several relationships that had ended before they truly began, each one surrounded by confusion I had blamed entirely on him. Daniel shook his head. "But not every time. Eventually his fear became stronger than his judgment. When you started caring about someone, he imagined waking up one day to an apartment where your room was empty and your laughter belonged to someone else. He hated himself for feeling that way, but he could not stop." I closed my eyes, remembering every unexpected phone call, every ridiculous interruption, every excuse that had seemed so absurd at the time. Daniel's voice grew softer. "Then Noah came along." I opened my eyes again. "He knew about Noah?" Daniel nodded. "Lucas looked into him the same way he quietly checked everyone else. This time he found nothing wrong. Noah was kind, honest, genuine. For the first time, Lucas realized he had no reason to interfere except one, which was Daniel gave me a tired smile filled with sympathy. He realized that if he stopped your happiness simply because he loved you, then he would become exactly the person he never wanted to be. So he made the hardest decision of his life. He stepped aside, moved out, and convinced himself that watching you build a future with someone else was the price of loving you the right way. My chest tightened until breathing itself felt unfamiliar. Every sacrifice, every quiet goodbye, every empty room suddenly made sense. Lucas had not walked away because he stopped loving me. He had walked away because he believed loving me meant letting me choose a life that no longer included him. Daniel's final words stayed with me all the way home, repeating in my mind until every memory I had built over the last 4 years seemed to rearrange itself into something completely different. Lucas had never asked me to love him. He had never tried to make me feel guilty. He had simply carried the weight alone until he believed the kindest thing he could do was disappear. The realization left me with one unavoidable truth. I could not let him believe that walking away was the ending either of us truly wanted. Before I could lose my nerve, I unlocked my phone and called Noah. He answered after the second ring with the same calm warmth that had drawn me to him from the beginning. "Hey, Ethan. Everything okay?" I took a slow breath. "I owe you complete honesty." There was a brief silence before he quietly replied, "Go ahead. You have been nothing but kind to me, and I respect you too much to pretend I can give you the future you deserve." I thought I was ready to move forward, but I have been looking in the wrong direction this whole time. Noah did not interrupt. When I finished explaining, he let out a gentle sigh. "I wondered if there was someone already living in your heart," he admitted. "Not because of anything you said, just because every time you talked about home, you accidentally described your roommate instead of your apartment." I closed my eyes. Even a man who had only known me for a few weeks had seen what I had completely missed. "I am sorry," I whispered. "Do not be," Noah answered kindly. "The worst thing would have been finding out years from now. Go find him." After thanking him, I ended the call and immediately searched through my contacts. Lucas never answered his phone. I called again, straight to voicemail. I sent a message asking where he was. Nothing. I drove to his office, but the building was already closed for the evening. I returned to the apartment he had rented, only to learn from the property manager that he had gone out several hours earlier. Standing on the sidewalk as the sun dipped below the Chicago skyline, I realized how many places in the city belonged to our shared memories. The little bookstore where we escaped rainy afternoons. The walking trail beside Lake Michigan where Lucas insisted every sunrise looked different. The diner with the pancakes. The rooftop parking garage where we watched 4th of July fireworks because neither of us liked crowded festivals. I searched one place after another, each stop reminding me that every favorite location I had claimed as mine had quietly become ours years ago. As evening settled over the city, I finally reached the lakefront. A cool breeze rolled across the water, carrying the distant sounds of traffic and gulls overhead. Near the familiar overlook where we had watched countless sunsets after difficult weeks, I spotted a tall figure standing alone with both hands resting on the railing. Even from a distance, I recognized the quiet posture that had always made Lucas seem steady no matter what he was feeling inside. I walked toward him, my heartbeat growing louder with every step. He turned at the sound of approaching footsteps, surprise filling his face when our eyes met. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Lucas offered a small, weary smile and said, "I thought you would be spending tonight with Noah." I shook my head, unable to stop the emotion rising in my voice. "The only person I needed to find was you." Lucas stared at me as though he was waiting for me to laugh and admit this was some elaborate misunderstanding. The evening breeze carried the scent of the lake between us while the city lights shimmered across the water. For the first time since I had met him, the man who always seemed to have an answer looked completely speechless. "Ethan," he said quietly, "you do not have to do this because you found those things." I shook my head. Those letters did not change how I feel. They changed what I finally understood. He lowered his eyes. "You deserve someone who can give you everything." I took another step closer. For 4 years, every time something good happened to me, you were the first person I wanted to tell. Every terrible day somehow became easier because I knew I was coming home to you. When you moved out, I kept telling myself I missed having a roommate. That was not true. I missed you. Lucas let out a slow breath, but he still looked unconvinced. "You are confusing comfort with love." I smiled sadly. "No, I confused love with comfort for a very long time. His eyes met mine again, filled with equal parts hope and fear. When Noah asked me what home meant, I thought about you before I thought about any place. When you left, the apartment was still standing, but it stopped feeling like home. That should have told me everything. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The silence no longer felt awkward. It felt honest. Finally, Lucas asked the question he had probably carried for years. What if you wake up someday and realize you only came after me because you felt guilty? I reached into my jacket pocket and carefully placed the small silver ring box into his hands. Then why would I bring back something you never asked me to wear? He looked down at the box, recognizing it immediately. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened it. The folded note was still inside. Not yet. Only when he smiles because of me, not because he feels sorry for me. I looked at him and smiled through the emotion I could no longer hide. I am smiling now. Lucas laughed softly, the sound almost disappearing into the wind, and for the first time in weeks the weight he had been carrying seemed to lift from his shoulders. He stepped forward and wrapped me in a gentle embrace that felt less like the beginning of something new and more like finally returning to a place we had both been searching for all along. 1 year later, apartment 5B looked familiar again. The bookshelf Lucas had built stood against the living room wall. Friday pancakes had returned as an unbreakable tradition. A lazy orange cat claimed the sunny spot beside the window every afternoon, even though Lucas insisted we were only fostering him. 2 matching silver rings rested in a small ceramic dish near the front door whenever we came home after work. Sometimes our neighbors still joked that they had known the truth before we did. They were probably right. One quiet Sunday morning, I locked the apartment door behind us as we headed out for breakfast. Lucas reached for my hand without thinking, and I smiled because the gesture felt as natural as breathing. He glanced over with the same warm expression that had greeted me through countless ordinary days. Ready? He asked. I looked back at the apartment for only a second before turning toward him. Home is not behind that door anymore, I said. Home is wherever we are together. And for the first time in my life, those words felt completely, unmistakably true.